I guess our first question we could talk about is sort of what you're up to. Obviously just graduated from Syracuse. How's that going? How's you balancing work? I know you're working in Long Island right now. Just tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I mean, I just graduated CUSE, and I was fortunate enough to get this job, and I'm the assistant coach at Colorado now, which has been so much fun. And I think, going through the job finding process for me, it was a little stressful, but I had a couple of offers, and I think the reason I chose Colorado, other than being a beautiful, beautiful state, was our head coach, Ann Elliott Whitten, and she's awesome, and she has taught me so much the past few months. And which I think is super important, because I'm not just like somebody who's in the coaching game just for now. This is my career. This is what I love to do. It's my passion. So, learning from her and learning underneath her has been incredible. And I know our season was cut short and we only had 5 games, but I know there's so much more for me to learn from her. So that's kind of where I'm at now, and I wouldn't trade it in for the world. I mean, I definitely wish that we could have, continued our season and had that run in the NCAA tournament, but it is what it is, and we're just trying to get better every day, as I'm sure everyone else is, and looking forward to that 2021 season now.
Definitely. So I guess with that, you said it's your passion to coach, and did that start on from an early age, or did you develop that in college? Like, hey, I want to coach lacrosse. How did that start?
So, I mean, basically going through my childhood, I started playing lacrosse when I was about 3 years old, right when I could really hold a stick. I played a little bit of men's with my cousins, always was messing around the backyard. And my dad was actually a coach. He coached a local men's varsity team. And around, I think when I was in about 6th grade, he switched over to the girls' side, and he was actually my varsity coach. And it was just always something where in my life, it was like kind of hard for me to find confidence off the field. But every time I stepped on that field, the confidence just like grew within me, and it was such a comfort like feeling, and that passion just developed over and over time. And I think that for me, it was really all about the confidence it gave me. So that kind of just drove me to want to pursue that in a career standpoint, and also kind of now me looking at the other side and being a coach, I kind of want to just continue kind of instilling that confidence in my players as the game really gave me. So that's like my main goal.
I like it. How old is the women's program at Colorado? And then B, what was like the process for you to kind of find a coaching job once you got out of college? And what was that kind of like versus getting recruited as a player in college and once you graduated trying to find a coaching role? And then how'd you kind of find Colorado? Was there anywhere else you were kind of thinking about, or just what was that process like for you?
Yeah, so our program's actually only about 7 years old, I believe. We started Ann Elliott started it in 2014, and that's what really drove me here, especially because knowing that I want to be a coach and that for a career path, it was the smartest move that I believed, because to learn under her, who has started this program, and it's only to be like 6-7 years old, to be where we are and to be a top 25, team competing in the NCAA tournament the last 3 years is like something super, super special. And I think it's also important that we're in the Pac-12. So everyone talks about, growing the game. And I think in order to do that, it's a very heavily recruited East Coast kind of sport. To be able to move that into the Pac-12 and to look at our roster and see all these girls from California, all these other places in the world, it's super important for me now to know that people talk about growing the game, but I feel like we're actually doing it, which is super, super cool. But going through the recruiting process as a player I feel like it was a lot less stressful because I felt like more at the time that these schools, where they were after us. It was their job to kind of get in touch with us and to do that type of stuff. But as a coach, I was really trying to sell myself and going through all these different interview processes that were like, it was different, but it was, again, it's, you look at it and it's the same thing either way. It's at the end of the day, it's lacrosse. That's what it is. And I started because it was fun. I love it because it's fun. I coach because I know how much fun it is. So, I mean, yes, the process of finding a job as a coach was a little stressful, but at the same time, you think about it and you think it's just lacrosse and we love it and I'm passionate about it. And I know I have the IQ for it and I'm confident again. And it all comes down to that confidence. I'm confident in myself when it comes to playing, when it comes to coaching. So I knew that this was definitely going to be the route for me to take when it comes to a career.
That's very cool. It's really interesting actually to hear that side of things to obviously be on the getting recruited side and now recruiting. Could you dive into a little bit of that? It's just, I guess, the mentality you talked about, selling yourself as a coach and as a program. Just in terms of that, is it just a lot harder in that standpoint? Obviously, you had to work for it in high school and do everything you could, but you're in a different spot. Could you talk about sort of that difference a little bit?
Yeah, totally. I mean, when it comes to being a player, it's super simple. You look and you're recruiting and you see a kid, kind of getting out of their comfort zone, which is exactly what I was about, going through the process. Not many people, if any, not many women in our sport, if any, shot from the outside. And I feel like I really, took that into consideration in my process. And I thought of myself, going through the recruiting process, and I looked at myself and I was like, hey, like, I'm 5'2", I'm not tall, I'm not that strong, I'm definitely not that fast. A little bit of explosiveness, I like to think, but, you never really know how that is. So what I had to really do was use my IQ developing. And, I look at these kids now, and you can tell any high school kid, hey, like, that's great that you're fast, that's great that you have a great stick. You get to that next level, everybody's going to have that. We're going to separate you from the person sitting next to you. And for that was me. So that's like kind of how I do relate to being recruited, because I was recruited because of my style of play, but I was also, I feel like, recruited because of my IQ. And if you tie that into coaching, obviously you look at any coach and they had the best like lax IQ when it came to playing as themselves. So for me, it was all about that. And I don't know, I guess I relate the two. So when I was going through the process of recruiting, it was kind of similar to my process of finding a job, because what I relied on was my lax IQ, and it definitely paid out in the end.
When did you kind of start leaning on like your IQ to really elevate your game, and how did you kind of start looking at that at a younger age? Just like looking at your game personally, you said you kind of have a unique style. How did you kind of develop your own strengths and your own weaknesses, and kind of how did that develop? Like, at what point in your career did you kind of start looking outside of just what you're physically doing on the field?
Yeah. So I think in high school, I relied like mostly on the fact that, a small school, not many people played lacrosse in my town. It was more of like a soccer town. So I think for me, just in high school, it was a little different because I relied on my natural talent, my work ethic, and a little bit of my IQ. But when I moved into my freshman year at Syracuse, I was fortunate enough to play for Gary Gate, one of the best in the game, and also alongside Kayla Trainer, who was one of the best in the women's game, I think probably the best. And for me, she was a senior at the time, so what happened was she was getting double teamed, she was getting face guarded, and every time she touched the ball, the defense would shift then to her, who was playing low left side at that time. And my spot was the high right side. So I think what happened was defense, I would see the defense shift, I would use my IQ to see that, I would put myself in a position where I knew that I can catch and shoot from the outside. And I also had so much trust in Kayla Trainer being the great player that she is, and her vision and her unselfishness to be able to skip that ball to me every time that defense shift was when I was able to like use my IQ then to find that open seam, know when to release my shot. And like I was looking at the goalie, but also waiting for that pass to come, kind of knowing where I was going to shoot before I even shot. So it was kind of a little bit like that. I think that IQ, again, like I can't stress enough how important that is when it comes to the game of lacrosse, especially the women's game. Just being able to see the plays before it happens is kind of what I look for and what I used to rely on.
Right. You talk about sort of the IQ a ton, and definitely is a huge part. I think that's what separates good players from being great players. And I guess from just a tangible standpoint, were there things, maybe weaknesses or your strengths that you sort of relied on, weaknesses that you tried to improve when you got to college and you were like, oh, I need to work on this? Say, hey, I'm playing with Kayla Trainer, but I need to help myself with this type of thing. So I guess work on this.
Totally. So again, going with back what you said, what separates the players from being good and being great, in my mind, I see, a good player can make themselves look good on the field, but a great player not only makes himself look good, but can make the people around them good. And that all comes from that IQ. And I think Kayla did a great job with that in my freshman year. And I wanted to be that. I wanted to do that in the years to follow. So when she left, my sophomore year came along, and it was tough. It was a tough adjustment because I kind of shifted that attention of the defense from her, like kind of went more towards my side, and it was harder for me to find that seam for that outside shot. So I worked a lot with Gary Gate, and we talked about it a lot, of becoming more of an off-ball player, more of a dodger, which was definitely a little bit of a struggle of mine. But, you work hard if it's something that you really want and something that you love and passionate about. And, I loved my teammates, and I wanted to work as hard as I could for them. So I really worked as hard as I could to become that more, rather than an outside shooter, I became more of like that dodger, more of that off-ball player. The outside shot was still there when I wanted it, and the 8 meters, of course, are huge in the women's game, so I would practice that as well. But I definitely had to shift from just shooting to more of like that dodging off-ball role.
That's awesome. In terms of Gary being a great mind of the game, could you share, I guess, some insights that he passed along to you? Maybe like, hey, if you're at this point of the field, maybe some specifics. I think kids would love to hear that type of stuff.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing with Gary was it wasn't even like what he was teaching us necessarily. I mean, he taught us a bunch in day-to-day basis, but I think what separated him in my eyes, and is why I was so drawn to Syracuse, was that he allowed us to be so creative. Like I tell my players all the time, like, you have a self-identity. You have to make yourself as a person, also as a player. And I want to make sure that all my players, are like comfortable being uncomfortable. So you can go out on the field and you can pass and catch. That's great. But I want you to have that knowledge and that ability and that confidence in yourself to be able to throw it behind the back when you want. And I've had coaches in the past tell me, like, try to steer clear of all that. Let's be more fundamental. Try not to play sidearm. And then I went to a Syracuse camp, going through the recruiting process, and Syracuse wasn't even on my radar. And I show up to camp, and we're doing partner passing first drill, and Gary goes, all right, let's do a little bit of sidearm. And I was like, this is where I want to go. Like, I was so confident in that because of his natural, personality of just being so creative and allowing us to be as creative as he was super special. And I think it really allowed me as a player to grow and to reach my full potential on and off the field too, knowing that it's okay to try new things and, again, be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
You've mentioned kind of just like your outside shooting a lot, and obviously with the women's game compared to the men's game, like obviously the outside shooting and stuff like that isn't as like prevalent, and you don't see it as much. When did you kind of start really like focusing on that and really putting that as like a cornerstone in your game? And when you did kind of start discovering that, how did you really elevate that strength and like work on that from a young age, and how that kind of developed through your career?
Yeah, so growing up, I was always trying to be out of the box. I never wanted to be that fundamental, like, in between the shoulders type of player. So when you talk to these kids and you're like, oh, make sure you're watching film, and a lot of these young girls will be like, okay, great, and they'll watch a bunch of women's games and stuff like that. For me, I grew up around the men's game. My dad was always playing in Lake Placid. I would watch him on the sideline. All my guy cousins, we'd play fiddlesticks in my backyard, just like hanging out and whatever. So I tried to like kind of, I watched a lot of women's game, Michelle Tumalo, Kayla Trainer. But what I really focused on too is I was watching not only women's, but I was watching the men's game. And I think it's super important. And I think that's when I kind of was like, hey, I don't have to run it in, 5 extra steps to be on top of a goalie when I'm taking a shot. I can take it from 15 yards out. Why not? And it's not me being lazy, not wanting to take those 5 extra steps. It's me knowing that my game, I might not be as explosive as the next person. So instead of trying to run it in and getting collapsed on by the defense, I saw that why not? If I can shoot and I have that strength from the outside, before the defense could even close, before the goalie's even expecting a shot to come, that's kind of like when I would just unleash it. So I think for me, it was a lot of growing up around the men's game that really steered me towards that type of style of play. And I don't know, I guess, again, just trying to be a little bit different than the next person.
I think that's honestly, it's a great point. And honestly, in the past year, in terms of just me coaching, I love being like doing stuff outside of the box and grew up on fundamentals. Everything you do, especially going to Maryland, it's all about fundamentals, getting your hands free, getting that ball out. And you go to the pros and it's like, wow, all these guys are so creative with their hands. And I started to develop so many different parts of my game. And I was like, why didn't I do this earlier? But I mean, a lot of people are different. Do you always preach, whether you're coaching a 10-year-old or a 16-year-old or even a 20-year-old that's in college, do you work on those, hey, let's get a little creative? Do you think everybody should be doing it, or is it particular to people that are sort of at that level?
I think any time really is earlier the better to start. I think in practice is the perfect spot because I'm talking a lot about the confidence and the confidence the sport gave me. If you want confidence in this sport, self-confidence is the most important thing, right? And in order to obtain self-confidence, you have to do something a million times, right? So practicing will actually give you that confidence. So the more you practice behind the back and throwing it behind the back, throwing it through the legs, whatever you're going to do, the more you practice it, the more confidence you will have in a game, and you'll be able to kind of like see, oh, this is a great opportunity. And you just do it. And I got to the point where in my career where I had some behind the back, some through the leg goals, and I'm not even thinking about it. It just happens because you just practice it so many times over and over again that you just get that confidence. But again, I've trained kids all throughout high school, college, and whatever. And after my freshman year, I was getting a lot of new kids come up to me and say like, hey, I want to learn your shot. And at this point, it's like anybody can learn, but it might not be everybody's strength. And I would explain to people again, like I wasn't the most explosive player, so I relied on that outside shot. If I have a kid come to me who's super explosive and I know can come off that 8 meter and just like 2-3 steps take a shot, that might be their strength. I want them to do that. Whatever's going to get the ball in the back of the net is best, obviously. So no, I don't think it's for everybody, but I think everybody can try it for sure. In that sense. And I also think, again, with the outside shot comes, people were coming up to me like, hey, I want to learn a shot. And it's like, well, first, you don't just learn the shot. You have to make sure you have, 1, the skill, and 2, the IQ, right? You have to know where the defense is. It's not very rarely in a game where you're going to stand in between the 8 and the 12 and just be able to plant and take a shot, right? There's going to be defenders and your own teammates running through the 8 at all times. You have to have that kind of sense and that awareness to know I probably shouldn't take the shot right now. I'm going to hit somebody. And I don't think everybody understands that. And most people think I'm just, taking a shot when I touch the ball, but really it's not. It's more of that IQ, like that awareness that people need to learn before they're able to take that outside shot.
And developing that skill, how much if you go back in time from say like 6th, 7th grade, whenever you started getting like really, I mean, you were saying you were playing in 3rd grade when you were 3. So obviously you've been pretty serious about it forever, but what was your like work ethic like when you were younger and going through high school before college, and like how much time and like just time on your own were you just hammering out those skills, and like what did your kind of workout regimen look like skill wise when you were growing up?
Right. So I actually never even thought about it as a work ethic because for me, it was always so fun. You hear the word work and it's like, it sounds like a job. Like you have to actually like, oh, I have to do something. For me, It was never work ethic. It was always, I want to. And it was always so much fun that I never didn't have my stick in my hand. There was times where I would bring it to the dinner table. Like I'd get a new pair of goggles and be so excited that I would sleep with them on when I was younger. Like for me, it wasn't a work ethic, but I was still doing it every day because of that passion and because of that just fun and whatever. But yeah.
So would you work with somebody? Was it on your own? Did you work with your dad, or how did it start?
Mostly I was working with my dad a little bit. I really trusted him and saw what he did on the field, watching him play. And it would be with him a lot, but honestly, it was more of just like whenever I can get a group of friends or my family barbecues, whatever, it was like, hey, like let's play mini sticks. Like, okay, yeah, let's do it. Yeah. And you're messing around the backyard. It's okay to throw a toe drag and drop it once in a while. So like you just try a bunch of new things, and I think that really helped me, not only become the player that I did, but also learn to enjoy the game, which I think is super special. And if you can get that more in that next generation coming up, I think a lot of them think about it right now as a job, and I think that their parents are pushing them to do all this work, but they should want to do it, and that's my experience. So I feel like I want to kind of recreate that whole image of lacrosse in general for the next generation. Like, hey, this is something you do because you love it and because you have fun doing it.
Right. Was there a moment, maybe in middle school even, that you realize you're like, I want to pursue lacrosse, or like, hey, I'm good at lacrosse and I want to pursue this? Was there a moment?
I honestly don't even, I feel like it was the second I picked up a stick
Yeah.
that I really want to do it. I do remember Lake Placid, back when my dad used to play. I used to go with all my cousins because my uncle played and whatever, and we had all our friends whose dads were also on the team, and we would go to the side and we would take a mini stick net and we would take our fiddle sticks and we would be like, to the other kids whose dads were playing our dads, we'd be like, hey, let's scrimmage. And we would just go out and I would just have so much fun. And I'm out there, there's like 10 of us and I'm probably the only girl on the field scoring most of the goals. And I just knew, I was like, this is where I'm confident. This is what I love to do. Like, I can totally see myself, playing at that next level. And then I guess as I got older, I was like, hey, like, I kind of have a knack for this and I love it so much. I want to be around it. I want to show other people and the next generation how much fun it is. And that's what kind of got me into coaching. And I think Reggie Thorpe was also a huge part of that, being my coach for 4 years at Syracuse. He showed me not just the X's and O's, but he showed me the connection that you can make with your players and like how much you can actually impact their lives. And that was huge for me. And he gave me a bunch of confidence in that. And the reason I'm a coach today, I think the credit would be to my dad and to Reggie Thorpe.
Love that. Yeah, Reggie's the man. I truly love that guy, and his just sort of love for the game truly rolls over to all his players. Did you play any other sports, or was it you were sort of lacrosse specific?
I played field hockey in high school, but I always knew it was like for fun. We had our summer leagues that I'd go to, and there was a couple of coaches on the sideline that were like club field hockey coaches, and they'd be like, hey, like, why don't you come play club for me over the summer? And I was like, nope, I'm good. Like, lacrosse is my passion. I play field hockey for fun, but I really do love lacrosse. But I also, again, think, the two translate a little bit, when it comes to just like, it's like the hand-eye coordination and all that stuff. I never played basketball because I wasn't that good at shooting, but I definitely love the game so much. And I think that also translates over to lacrosse. You watch all these guys playing box lacrosse all the time, and it's all pick and rolls and flips and fake flips and all that stuff. And I really love that. And I think it's a huge part of my game. And also what I'm trying to bring now to Colorado is that style of two-man and whatever. So those are the only other sports that I would really consider. But again, lacrosse was always the main sport. I always came back to lacrosse.
Talk a lot about like wanting to give back to like the next generation. Obviously, getting into coaching, you're doing exactly that. But if you could kind of look back and like talk to yourself at 12, 13 years old, put yourself in your shoes, in like your own shoes again, what would you kind of tell yourself to do the same or do differently, just based on what you've gone through so far?
That's a tough one. I mean, I would definitely tell myself to like continue just loving the game and don't forget your why, right? Like, as I went through, college, there were some points where I was like, it was always fun. I was always with my best friends and I always wanted to work hard for them. But there were some moments where I was like, wow, like this is pretty tough, like whatever. But then you got to think about it and you got to remember your why. Like, why? Like, I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I want to be. And sometimes you just got to remember that. So I think looking back at my younger self, I would tell myself, just always remember your why. Always remember these moments that you're having in your backyard, on the beach, and whatever, with your mini stick in your hand and the smile on your face. Like, that's definitely something that I would hope that everyone can remember.
You talked about like certain points in college where it got tough for you. What was it that kind of got tough for you, and kind of what were some of the roadblocks that you dealt with at college, and kind of how'd you get through those and how'd you deal with those?
Yeah. So college, like in general, I mean, we've obviously all been through it here, but I think in general, it's a tough spot, whether you're an athlete or you're not. You're kind of trying to find your own, who you are. You're trying to find who you are, and you're trying to find your own perspective on life. You grow up in a house with your parents, and like, it's kind of their ways or your ways, but now you're off on your own and you're trying to figure out all of that stuff. So I think that alone is difficult. And now you throw in being a student athlete on top of it. It definitely works as an outlet, and it's, again, somewhere fun to go. But I think also just trying to find who you are is like a struggle within itself. And I think my sophomore year, I lost my grandfather, and that was really hard on me. And it was right before fall ball, and I remember going to the run test like a week after his death and being like, just upset and whatever. And I was nervous for the run test on top of all that anxiety. And then just being like kind of letting loose and being with my teammates and being with them and hearing them cheer for me. It was like, it wasn't even a problem. struggle-wise, but I think just in general that year trying to find out who I was, losing my grandfather, which was the first time I lost somebody that was close to me. And also that was the year that Kayla Trainer had graduated. So now that's when everything shifted. And again, I went through that struggle of trying to, shift my game from being that outside shooter to now having to adapt to something different and to a new type of offense, because every year, your offense is different every year. And trying to now adjust to that, adjust with playing with different people and just a different style because of our personnel. Like that was kind of a struggle, but I do think that, my coaches and my teammates really helped me through that. So it wasn't as bad, but definitely a little bit of a sophomore slump there.
Yeah. What about, so you've mentioned Kayla Trainer a couple times. Obviously, it sounds like she was probably a role model, mentor for you. What do you admire most about her, just outside of her obviously being a great role model? Like talk about her as a teammate a little bit, or just a mentor for you.
Her leadership was huge. I can actually tell you like a little bit of a funny story, not to throw myself under the bus, but I was a freshman in college. I was getting my work done in the classroom, but probably not to the standard that I could have been. And I remember her sitting down with me, and I'm like, oh, she's my friend, whatever. And I remember her getting real serious and being like, hey, like, you're being selfish. You need to do what you need to do in the classroom in order for us to be successful on the field. And kind of just guiding me through that and knowing that in order to be successful, like you can't just pick one aspect of your life to be successful. If you want to be successful, you got to strive and be the best you can in every aspect of life. And I think that she really instilled that leadership kind of role and mentorship in me. And that conversation after that, it was like a flip switch. And I was like, you know what, you're right. And like, just so much respect for her as a player, but mostly as a person. She really inspired me to be like a leader throughout my next 3 years at Syracuse, and eventually a captain my senior year. A lot of like struggles that we like faced as captains, I kind of would put myself in a situation and be like, all right, what would Kayla have done? And that's kind of how I went through that year. And I do think that's why we were so successful my freshman year, is because of our leadership as a whole. And I think that's why, we were successful the years to come, because it all comes down to that leadership. Every team at that level is going to be successful. Every team's going to have, every team's going to have their stick skills. Every team's going to have their like 3 or 4 like top players. But what comes really down to who's going to win a national championship, who's going to go to that Final Four, who's going to succeed on the field, comes down to team culture. And I think Kayla as an individual, but also that senior class my freshman year, really did a great job of instilling a tremendous team culture. And that goes back to Reggie Thorpe as well, is just like you wanting to succeed, you wanting to be your best because of that person next to you. So I'm trying to be my best as they're trying to be theirs, and we just kind of work hard for each other. And I think that's super important to wanting to get to that championship, that Final Four. It's going to all come down to your team culture.
Right. You talked about culture, and I guess from learning from Kayla, you go through it in college. It's like you have that culture piece. You're like, oh, this is what you're doing. You follow the seniors, and then when you get to be a senior, you're like, all right, everybody's following us. Like we have to obviously instill it in everybody. So did the culture piece change at all from when you were a freshman to when you were a senior? Was it harder on you? Did it affect your game at all? I guess you can talk on that culture piece, how it developed over the 4 years.
Definitely. I think, like I said before, every year, every team is different. Different personnel, different schemes, different everything, sometimes different coaches. So you really have to adjust. And I think, I think that it's super important to always just have that sense of leadership. And I think through my years, we definitely dipped, and you can see like my sophomore, junior year, we didn't go as far as we would have hoped to go. But again, my freshman and senior year, we did. And I really do think it all comes down to that leadership and who the team is going to look up to and trust. And it's all about that trust, and you got to trust your coaches and trust your teammates. And I think that we really had that my freshman and senior year especially.
What do you think was like the biggest difference between your freshman senior year to like your sophomore junior year when you guys dipped? Like what kind of sticks out to you as like a person on the team, obviously big role on the team, like what kind of sticks out that was different between those sophomore junior years?
Personally, personally, I think that it was like the roles changing, you know, that my freshman year we lost like a bunch of the seniors who were playing major roles in our game, and we kind of had rebuilding years a little bit my sophomore, junior year back until my senior year. So it was definitely like personnel building wise and stuff like that. But I don't know, I feel like our cultures were the same my freshman and senior year. I feel like everybody wanted to be at practice. Everybody wanted to be there. Everybody wanted to work hard. Where I feel like my sophomore, junior year, it was a little bit of a struggle sometimes, and there was like other outside, you know, conflicts and stuff like that. But I really think my freshman year and my senior year, we were so successful because of our culture and because everybody just loved each other as a whole and wanted to work hard for that person next to each other.
What about, so like with like the game growing and stuff like that, going like trying to bring what you've learned from Syracuse to Colorado, what's been the adjustment as far as like getting to a new school, the younger program? Like have you noticed anything that has changed since you got there, or anything that like stuck out to you right away? Like, I kind of want to bring this from Syracuse to here, and just like kind of what's it like growing a newer program? And then I don't want to like throw too many questions at you at the same time, but like just like growing the game, what's kind of like the scene of like the Pac-12 women's lacrosse, and just the scene around lacrosse from fans and younger kids and stuff like that?
Right, and so that's actually a great point. And what I think the biggest thing is that you know, that confidence of being comfortable being uncomfortable. I think playing on the East Coast, growing up on the East Coast, and playing in the ACC, you know, it came to the point where throwing a behind the back in the middle of the game was like, okay, yeah, that's normal. You should be doing that if you're in the right position. That's not really a trick shot to me anymore, because it's something that everybody should kind of just develop within their game. And now I'm like, I go over to the, you know, Midwest, and I'm in Colorado, and some of these kids are like not really comfortable doing it. They don't feel that confidence. It's because they're not doing it every day. And I think that I really want them to just be okay with, you know, failure, especially because failure means that you at least tried, right? So I don't want these kids coming here and being afraid to try. And I think a lot of them were that. They were afraid, you know, like to throw behind the back. Well, what if it doesn't go in? Well, who cares if it doesn't go in? You know, you got to try it. If you're in the right spot and it's the right time, definitely try it, you know? So I think that was the biggest difference coming from the East Coast and now going to the Midwest and trying to grow that game, is trying to grow that, again, that confidence in these kids and making sure that they know, like, I want you to be out of the box. I want you to try new things. I want you to get creative, not only because it will expand your game and it will make you a better player, but also because it'll make you have more fun and it'll help you remember your why.
And then just with like the growing the game and stuff like that, what's the Pac-12 women's lacrosse kind of scene like? How are you guys kind of trying to grow it like grassroots into like surrounding communities like near you guys at Colorado? And just kind of what's the like fan scene and stuff like that when you're playing other Pac-12 schools?
So unfortunately,
Yeah.
you know, our season got cut within 5 games, and we only played like one Pac-12 team. We only played Oregon, so I'm not really too familiar with the Pac-12 yet. But what I have noticed in my short time there is the atmosphere is a little different, where like you go to a school like Syracuse and the town, the community just supports lacrosse so much. We're playing in the Dome, and you know, you have kids running up to you after like signing autographs and doing press conferences and all that stuff. And now now I'm out in Colorado, you know, it's a little bit different. It's not so common for a younger kid to be playing our sport, you know. So I think for us as a community and as a program, is what we're trying to do is we're trying to, you know, we run a couple of camps and clinics throughout the year, but also like we had, I think we were playing Coastal Carolina this year, and post game, we had a bunch of little kids who came to the game come out onto the field, and our whole team did a big clinic with them. And it was only about 30 minutes, but it was just a good time. And our team was able to, you know, converse with these young age groups and kind of mentor them and teach them different little skills of lacrosse, and hopefully that rubs off on them and they can go home and tell their friends and be like, hey, mom, dad, I want to play this sport. I want to try it. Like, and then they can get involved. I think that's super important. You know, we want to be able to try, like, to pull from, you know, your local area. You look at kids in upstate New York, and our entire roster was pretty much New York, some Maryland kids, but mostly New York, upstate, Long Island, that type of thing. When I come to Colorado, I see we have 4 or 5 kids from Colorado, but it's majority. We have people from all over, which I think is super cool. But also we want to kind of dive into that local, local pool of recruits, because it's convenient, and not everyone wants to go away to school. So I think it's important to also like dive into some of the local club teams, get involved with them, and try to show them like that we can be just as good as a East Coast school. You might not have to go that far if you want to go away to school. You can come to us and you can just learn just as much and be just as successful.
That's awesome. And just talking about growing the game, and I sort of just picking up, you have a different style. I love the creativity. You've stuck to lacrosse, been a passion of yours. Is there any bad recommendations that you've heard from maybe a coaching standpoint or like a technical standpoint on the field or off the field in lacrosse that you sort of maybe not agree with?
100%. I mean, that happens actually more often than I would have hoped. When I was going through the recruiting process, I was in about 9th grade. I was playing club lacrosse, and I had one of the club coaches come up to me and say, hey, I don't think you should be playing sidearm. I don't think it's going to work in the next level. And that crushed me as a player. I was like, somebody I looked up to is now telling me I can't be who I am. I can't be that person as a player. And I remember being in tears after one of our tournaments, and my dad coming up to me and being like, don't worry about it. It's one opinion, whatever. But, I think as a young female, especially, like I really took that to heart, and it kind of shut me down for a second. And then I went to a Syracuse camp, and again, Gary said, let's do partner pass, let's play sidearm. And I was like, hell yeah, like let's dive in. So I think you're definitely going to come across that struggles. You might not always agree with your coach, but I think in the moment, and especially, and comes back to also being a good leader, is you might not agree with your coach, but you have to kind of adjust your way of thinking and make sure that you stand by him and also support the best for all of your players. But I think for me, it was more in my younger years of being kind of held back, I felt like.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Looking back too. So like in the past, I guess going through your entire years of college, past like 5-6 years, are there any new habits that you picked up that helped you just navigate through college or helped you as an athlete that you weren't doing before you got to college?
Definitely. And that all goes to organization, right? And time management. I feel like you can go through high school and maybe it's just me, but and kind of float through high school or skate through high school and just kind of whatever. But when you get to college, it comes down to who can time management well and who has the best work ethic and dedication and that stuff. And I think that's why that makes us as athletes just more ideal to have in a workforce and applying for jobs, not only in the lacrosse world, but just all over, because of our work ethic and because of our time management skills that we learn from being student athletes. I think for me, it was huge coming to that organization. I was always that kid in high school that, you take your sheet of notes and you just shove it in your backpack. You don't care if it gets wrinkled or whatever. And I think in college, you have to be a little bit more precise when it comes to that stuff, and just learning through those ways. And we had so much support at Syracuse. We had our academics advisors. Actually at Syracuse, I can give a huge shout out to Kat Cheney, who was our athletic trainer. She helped me get through so much, not just injury wise, but like just mental health. I feel like she really helped me through and got me to talk to people that I needed to talk. And, you have the sports psychologist, which you don't really think about or even know that those exist in high school, where, getting to that next level. And I think that all these people really helped develop me into not only the player, but more importantly, like the person that I have become.
Talking about that too, just like kind of different blocks or anything that it was kind of taking you down as a player. What would you say was your biggest failure that kind of led to success, and like how did you learn from that situation?
Biggest failure.
Or maybe not even failure, but just like biggest kind of struggle.
I got to think about that one. That one's pretty tough. I think, for me, actually I got it. All right. So, and this is what I go through with a bunch of recruits is I'm telling them, like, you want to pick the spot where you're going to feel most comfortable. Right. And if you look at any athlete and you say, what is going to be your biggest regret? You don't want to have regrets as an athlete. What's going to be your biggest regret? And, people can say injury or whatever, but that's not true. What I think, I think a biggest regret you can have as an athlete, especially a college athlete, is you only have 4 years to play the sport. You want to reach your full potential. So for me, the biggest regret would be not reaching that full potential. And that can come down to a number of things. That can go back to, injuries and whatever. But I think it's super important to make sure that you're able to kind of realize, like, hey, I only have 4 years playing the sport. I'm going to do everything I can in my power to make sure that I'm ready, whether it's extra film sessions with coaches, whether it's, extra reps on the field. No matter what it is, you want to make sure that you don't want to have that regret. I think failure is okay. I encourage failure, right? I want you to make mistakes. I want to see how you react after you make a mistake. Are you going to hang your head on the field after a drop pass, or are you going to work your ass off to like run back and ride and get the ball back for your team? I think that is the most important thing. So I don't really think failure is a problem. What I think it is that you don't want to have any regrets, and you want to make sure that you reach that full potential.
What injuries did you go through?
So I had a couple of minor ones throughout my years. My biggest injury was definitely my senior year. I had surgery on my ankle in the fall. My peroneal tendon was snapping, so I had a couple screws put in. Tried to work my way back. I'm like, hey, it's my senior year. Like I'm gonna play. I'm not redshirting. Like whatever. So I ended up playing that season. Halfway through, I was having problems on my other foot, and then kind of got to the time where like it was struggling. I could barely walk after games. And then, I ended my senior year, unfortunately, 1 game short of a Final Four, and then went to a doctor as soon as I got home and found out that I've actually torn my plantar fasciitis on my other foot, the one that I didn't have surgery on. So it was like kind of a whole mess. So feet were definitely the worst injury, but there was also a little minor ones along the way.
Yeah, so like me personally, I did like a couple ACLs going through high school, and then last one was in college, kind of career ender for me. But like one of my biggest regrets was just kind of like the stuff that I really the stuff that I wasn't doing like while I was hurt. Like I was really just focusing on getting my knees back ready and stuff like that, and kind of didn't focus as much on like the skill portion of things and just like keeping my stick work where it needed to be, or just I kind of had my priorities kind of off when I was kind of going through those injuries. Were there any like regrets with how you handled your injuries? Like I obviously, like my first one, I definitely came back too fast from it, and like looking back, like I just wanted to get back on the field so bad as like a young kid, and obviously wasn't really looking like bigger picture with things. But just with your personal injuries and problems with injuries, is there any like regrets that you kind of have that you wish you would have handled them differently?
Definitely. I actually do. I feel the same way. I kind of rushed back into it, but it's hard for me to say that I regret it because it was my senior year and I wasn't trying to redshirt, and it was like, I could have missed the first 3 games. Like I definitely regret that a little bit because I did come back too soon. But stick work wise, I was on a scooter because of my ankle, and I was sitting on my scooter still playing wall ball. I was in a boot. I actually went to go shoot. It was a bunch of my teammates, and it was just for fun. We were just messing around, and I couldn't really get that step down and I couldn't really shoot or run because of my ankle, and I was in a boot. So, but I still wanted to go and hang out, so I threw on some goalie gear, and I started just taking some shots with tennis balls because it was the only way for me to play, and I don't regret that because that's actually something that I do remember, and it's a funny story to tell, and we talk about it sometimes, me and my teammates. Like some of them thought I was crazy, but like I missed the game so much, and I definitely don't regret that.
Definitely. I think you talked a lot about it, I guess, back to your like psyche of just your confidence. And I truly think it's everything, and how somebody develops that confidence. You talked about reps. Is there anything that you do sort of to help your confidence, whether that's, I don't know, you practice some sort of mental stuff, but I think everybody's different. How else do you improve your confidence?
Yeah. So to improve my confidence, I watch a lot of game film on myself, and I like will break myself down, and sometimes I'm a little hard on myself. So what I have to do is I kind of have to, what I'll do after a game is I'll talk to my dad. If I feel like I was playing like not myself and I wasn't doing that well, whatever, I'll talk to him, and he'll be honest with me, but he'll also be like, point out the positives. A lot of times if I'm very like self-critical. So if I'm watching my own game film, I might see something as negative where he can then spin it as a little bit of a positive. And I think it's finding that positivity, and like as a coach especially, I think it's so important for us as coaches to instill confidence into our players. Yes, they need to have that self-confidence, and that will come from them doing reps and stuff. But I think especially in the girls game, like and some people might disagree, but I think, we react to comments different than men would. And I think that it's important for us kind of to get, as a female coach, to instill that confidence in my players. What I have to make sure is, like, if I'm going to criticize them, I make sure to throw a positive in there with them. So they're not focusing just on the negatives. I make sure that they're able to see the positives in what they're doing and how they can improve.
Right. I think that's definitely on the men's side as well. So that sort of thing. Yeah, it's definitely huge.
Well, there's a quote actually my dad used to say to me all the time that I love, and it's the men, when you're coaching, the men need to win in order to or compete in order to have fun, when the girls just need to have fun in order to compete. And I think that's a little relevant, I
hear you. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
What do you think with, like, you're obviously pretty close to the men's game and the women's game. What do you think is, like, the biggest difference as, like, if you were growing up, kind of, like, what's the biggest positive takeaway that you got from kind of growing up playing the men's game a little bit that kind of helped you, obviously besides just the outside shot, but how did that help, like, translate to the women's game?
I think it's, again, that creative style. There was a couple of times where I would take one hand and cradle kind of like a guy and be okay with it. Like, if I'm going to set up a dodge, I'm not just going to, like, hold my stick straight up and down. I'm going to hold it one end, like, one hand on my butt end, one hand, like, really close to my head, and I'm going to run up to somebody and, like, get that jump stop dodge really quickly. But I think mostly, and this is kind of, it might be a little bit obvious, but it's the physicality of the game in general. That you have these kids, especially growing up in places that might not be as lacrosse oriented, like a lot of the southern places. I mean, you got Maryland, you have New York, you have, all these upstate, you have all these places that are really lacrosse heavy, and it's kind of like, the hotbeds for it. But then what about the kids that are in Georgia and Florida and whatever? And the refs there might not be as lenient with some of these Long Island schools. So we can get a little bit more physical. But you take a kid from Georgia who's not used to getting hit so much, and they're kind of flopping all over the place, dropping the ball, bobbling it like that. I think for me, playing with that physicality of the men's game really taught me how to stand my ground, how to take the contact and use the contact, right? To kind of, like, what I would do is, if I was ever around the crease as a crease attacker, I would let the defenders, make contact. I would lean into them, use their push then back off me to get that, to free my hands, to get that separation, to lean back and then be able to shoot off my back foot in tight. So I think the physicality was definitely huge for me, and learning to deal with that contact and play through the contact and actually want to have that contact while I was playing offense and while I had the ball.
Do you coach that at all to, like, the girls that you're coaching now?
All the time. We have something we call shooting squad, and it's like 3 times a week, and the girls will come and we'll do different drills, and we use the football pads where I'll be standing, on the crease basically, and have them kind of run into me. I'll push off and really, like, give them a nice jab and have them kind of take that drop step, almost like a fadeaway, again, relating to basketball, where they'll fade away and then be able to take a shot as they're freeing their hands away from the defender. But using that contact, I think it's super, super important.
And then talking about, like, practice too, kind of. So a lot of athletes probably at home right now, just a lot of them just working on their own. If you had 4 hours a week only to train and prepare for lacrosse, how would you allot that time, and what would you be doing if you only had 4 hours in a week?
Yep. So this is perfect. And this comes to actually club lacrosse. And I learned this from a coaching club with my dad. He actually runs a club team here on Long Island at Legacy. And, if you have 4 hours with a group of girls, you're probably not going to be able to condition them into any type of shape. So my advice to coaches doing that is to stay away from the conditioning. If you're going to have 4 hours, focus on their skill. They can condition on their own and do whatever, but what you really have to dial into is making sure that everyone's working on their skill, working on their IQ, doing drills like that. You can be game ready and in shape by just running through a bunch of drills. You don't need to necessarily be like, especially in the club world, you have 2 practices a week. Don't make them get on the line. Don't have them run sprints. You're not helping anybody. I think it's really important just to focus on that skill. If you're going to have a limited amount of time, that is the most important piece. And by working on that skill and doing a bunch of man-up drills especially, you can really shift that IQ and like transition drills, and having the players kind of just be able to be repetitive about these transitions. So when it happens in a game, they'll know what to do, and it'll just be like automatic for them because they'll be able to see it in their head, and that comes down to that IQ. But again, you're running a club team, you're running a club program, you have 2 practices a week, you're not conditioning anybody, so stay away from those sprints.
How much conditioning do you guys do at Colorado versus just trying to implement it into just straight lacrosse? Because I mean, in college, you obviously have a little bit of a time constraint on how much time you can be practicing and spending on different things. How do you guys kind of look at that?
Right. So, we definitely do our fair share of conditioning, but again, what we really focus on are these, high active like drills and fast paced drills. The faster paced the drills are, the more in shape they'll become. But also they're focusing then. I feel like maybe this is just me, but as a player, when you put your stick down, you get on the line, you're running, and that's great mental toughness, and because you're thinking about it. But you put your stick in your hand and you start running up and down the field, doing transition drills, and you're not even thinking about it because your stick's in your hand, you're having fun because you're playing your sport, but you're also you're conditioning, and that's when you come into like game shape. And I think game shape can't really be mimicked through conditioning drills. I think it's kind of just through lacrosse drills in order to be in game shape.
What's your favorite drill to do on your own? Do you have like some type of like staple routine where it's like every time you go out on a field by yourself, you're doing X or you're doing Y?
I do actually, and super important for anybody trying to learn sidearm is, when I was younger, I used to do it all the time, is I would take my dad, or I grew up with sisters who played lacrosse, so I would have them just hold their stick out in front of me, and I would make sure that I can just shoot under them. So just to work on that form and like kind of closing of the wrist to make sure that I'm able to get that riser low to high and whatever. So that's definitely what I do, like just step downs. But I mean, it's pretty much like, that's when it kind of goes back to the basics. So what I'll do is one knee shooting. So you put, your opposite foot, your opposite leg, your knee up and one knee on the ground, and you just work on that rotation. And, we call it, I call it kiss the guns, right? So if you take your bottom hand and you make a muscle, and you want to make sure that you get your arms up and away so that you're kissing the guns up here rather than kind of getting to shoot here. And, I'm huge with analogies too. So I talk about shooting and I teach shooting all the time because it was one of my strengths. But I love to use the analogy of a slingshot. So it's like my body is a slingshot, and all my core muscles and my leg muscles, my arm muscles, those are all the rubber bands in a slingshot. So if I pull a slingshot back and I don't really stretch the rubber bands, it's not going to go very hard. It's not going to go very fast. But if I really feel that stretch and I reach back and I pull those rubber bands, then you're going to get a much faster, harder like shot. So it's the same thing in lacrosse. If my body is at slingshot, all those core, if I don't feel my core or my arms or my legs stretch before I'm taking a shot, I'm not ready to shoot, and it's not going to be as hard as I want it.
That's a great point.
I like it. What about, so if you're someone being the Midwest, it's obviously hard, like as a young lacrosse player, probably less resources than if you're on the East Coast. Do you have any like favorite social media accounts that you get the most value out of, or that you would like suggest following for someone that doesn't have as many great coaches around, like someone like yourself?
Definitely. I mean, I do follow Shake School. I think Shake School is awesome. But a lot of what I do like too is Dana Dobie and Jen Adams, the Loyola staff. They actually have their own training account, and I believe it's 7 Lax Training, something like that, on Instagram. And I think they have great drills, and it's all out of the box. It's all what I love, and I really respect everything they do. So I try to watch a lot of that.
Do you have any favorites for like outside like the skill portion? You've talked a lot about like confidence and just like mental training. Do you have any like favorite like kind of mental accounts or like people that you get inspiration from?
Yeah, I do. I read. I don't read often, but when I do, it's John Gordon. I love what he's about. The fact that he was a lacrosse player himself at Cornell is huge. So I follow him, and I listen to his podcast. I read a lot of his books if I can, and I try to learn as much as I can from him, and just as a person, and that type of stuff, and more of the cultural aspect to the game. I think that is huge, and I'll take I'll take some of his books sometimes, and if I have a player that like might need to read a certain book, I'll pass it out. And my books have whenever I go through the books, whether it's a plane ride or whatever, a bus trip, I have his book and a highlighter, and I highlight my favorite points of it, and then I'll give that book to a player and be like, hey, focus on these points. So.
If you had to just off the top of your head make like a little, we all know Spark Notes, going back to the day of just crushing books for English class and just reading Spark Notes. If you just had to kind of list some of your biggest takeaways from John Gordon, what would you kind of put on there?
I would definitely put like all of his team culture stuff that he talks about. His book, You Win in the Locker Room First, I think is huge for any leader, not only captain, but a leader in general. He talks a lot about how to win over a team and like gain trust and all that stuff. And he does talk about, I think he calls it like the 7 C's, and it's, his confidence and all that stuff. I would definitely like look into those chapters of those 2 books.
That's awesome. You talk about growing the game, and I guess for you, being out there, where do you see lacrosse in 10 years? And if you had the unlimited resources, what would you do to get to that point that which you would love to see lacrosse at in 10 years?
So I think, we're starting, obviously we have like the PLL, the WPLL, and that's all great. I think, but there's no, there's, in the women's side, at least there's, I don't know, 4 or 5 teams. There's no Midwest team. I think that would be super cool to throw that in there. I think that would be really important. And I think a lot of people, they, like me personally too, especially with my injury my senior year and not actually making it to the WPLL like that I would have hoped, is just like knowing that you're only going to have these 4 years. What can you do with those 4 years? And I think in order to grow the game, not everyone's going to get to the WPLL, but I think if you can do the most you can through your college career and do whatever you got to do, and not to point myself out, but you see like people on SportsCenter, Kylie O'Miller has been on there and all that stuff. If we can get ourselves to be doing more creative things like throwing it through a leg, throwing it behind the back, and getting that recognition from SportsCenter of all accounts, like that's huge for just growing our game in general. Besides the fact of creating this professional league and trying to grow it more west and more towards us in Colorado, because again, it's you look at the teams and it's all East Coast.
Right. So if you had the unlimited resources, how would you go about doing that in terms of helping?
The funding, I would probably try to, start that, start another team, maybe a California team, maybe a Midwest team, and trying to grow that. I would definitely encourage more people to go to Lake Placid and play in Lake Placid. I know it's only like 1 weekend, but it's a great time, and it helps you like kind of remember your why, because you're there not only to play lacrosse with all your friends, but you're there to compete and have fun and all that stuff. So I think if I had unlimited resources, I would definitely like start more programs out west and kind of do that. And maybe even more tournaments out west, because you look at all these tournaments and we're traveling constantly to the East Coast. We're going to Jersey, Philly, Delaware, all that stuff, but no one's really coming out towards us for these big tournaments. You see California club teams, Colorado club teams, Midwest club teams all over the East Coast, but you never see those East Coast teams coming out to us. And I think that would be super cool, especially because of just like how much field space we would have and how many like different activities it would be for other people. Like I talked about Lake Placid, but in Colorado we actually have our own. There's another tournament out there, and it's a Vail tournament, and it's very similar to Lake Placid, like an adult league, like just fun and lacrosse and people all over. But not many people know about it because lacrosse is such an East Coast dominant sport.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about kind of feeling like you got snubbed from the WPLL a little bit. Sounds like. Are you still working to try to come back into the game, or like how are you still putting time into lacrosse, and like what are you doing just as far as like still playing and like still trying to keep the game in your life outside of just coaching?
Absolutely. So I think I would love to join the WPLL if someone want to pick me up. I mean, I would, even if it was just for a man up squad, I would do it just for that outside shot. But I think, as an athlete in general, graduating college, you spend 4 years working so hard. it's hard to kind of just drop off and not do anything. So I'm still staying active. I'm still, working out, going for my runs, but as a coach, my stick's always in my hand. So I jump in drills with my players all the time. If they need like help, I'll be on the scout team if I really need to, whatever I can do. So I try to continue to play, and if it were to happen, great. But if not, just being in Colorado and being with my own team and being able to play and practice and stuff is a lot of fun. So that's all right.
Awesome. Anything you've kind of, since Corona started, is there anything that you've kind of implemented into your life that you weren't doing like before quarantine or anything like that has kind of helped you, whether it be time management or just as a coach, anything that you've started doing that you're going to keep doing after Corona, or that you wouldn't have had the opportunity if it wasn't for quarantine?
I mean, I guess I have more time on my hands to be like a little bit more creative, and I'm definitely watching more videos and more film than I would have been. So trying to like take drills from other coaches and kind of trying to morph them into like my own and how they can fit within our team and our strengths and weaknesses, trying to do more stuff like that. But really, I guess, as a college coach, you don't really get weekends in the summer because you're constantly recruiting. So I guilty as charged, I've been enjoying those on the boat. But yeah.
What do you think you have to improve as the most as a coach, and like how do you think about that, and how do you kind of recognize those things and try to work on those things?
So actually I realized this within the first 2 games is one, starters as a coach, it's really hard because as a player you're more in control. You're actually on the field with the ball doing things. Like there was times I'm on the sideline like tight in a game. If it's a 1-goal game, I'm like I just want to get on the field and just do it. And I think that's a hard adjustment. But I also think like what I really need to learn and be better at is just like kind of relating to some of the players. Like, again, coming from the East Coast, coming from an ACC team, sometimes I expect them to just know what I want from them or what they should be doing in situations where realistically they don't, and they're not me, and I have to know that, and I have to know that, again, and it goes back to that whole outside shooting, not everybody can do that, and I have to, as a coach, kind of see that and know that and be okay with it, which I am okay with it because I'm so about player identity and being who you are on the field and finding your strengths and weaknesses and making sure that you can be your best. But I think as a coach, like that's the biggest struggle of mine that I have to get better with is kind of knowing personnel and knowing like, hey, this person is not me. They might not be able to do this, or like right now might not be the time, and just kind of being like okay with that and adjusting and finding different ways for them, which is like, it's fun for me because it's almost like a puzzle, like trying to find out different ways for them to succeed that's different than me and different me as a player.
What have your goals? Were you like a big goal setter through like high school and college, and like are you a big goal setter as a coach, and how have your goals kind of evolved throughout your career?
Definitely. I mean, my goals have not changed since the time I was in high school, college, and now as a coach. It all comes down to I do not care at all about personal accolades. I couldn't care less. What I really wanted was, I always wanted a championship. In high school, I wanted a state championship, a county championship. College, you want that national championship, that ACC championship. And now as a coach, it's the same thing. I want that Pac-12 championship. I want to see my players succeed. I want them, and it's not for me, it's for them. I want to be able to help them so that they can experience that championship game format, and I want them to be able to go to a Pac-12 and them to be going to a national tournament. But so the goals are really the same. But I also think it's super important. You take a mountain and you're just looking at the top of a mountain, you're going to trip on the potholes right in front of you, right? So what I do think is super important is when you're setting goals is not to just look at the big picture. Like every team shows up that first game or first day of the season or first practice of the season, and they all say, hey, I like, we're going to win a national championship this year. Like, that's great. But you and 50 other schools are saying the same thing. What you have to focus on is making sure that you're just getting better every day. Right. And you don't want to just focus on that one national championship, because it's going to take a lot of steps for you to get there. It's not going to be just an easy coasting ride, and you're not just going to get there just to get there. Right. You're going to have to work hard throughout the entire season, throughout the entire off season in order to get there. So I think setting goals, it's super important to make sure that you're setting them on a day-to-day basis and kind of keeping track of each game as they come and not just that overall championship.
I guess sort of pivoting, but is there anything maybe as a player and as a coach that sort of keeps you up at night, maybe that makes you feel overwhelmed or sort of unfocused? And what would you like to do to sort of help yourself get over it?
Yeah, I think, again, as a player, as a coach, like as an athlete in general and a competitor in general, you're always going to have those little regrets and what could I have done differently and all of that stuff. But I think it's super important not to dwell on it so much. You can let that eat you alive, or you can just get out there and work harder and next time it happens, don't make the same mistake. So you definitely want to learn from those regrets, but you don't want to dwell on them where they're keeping you up at night as much as you could. I know it's a lot easier said than done, but
Right.
Trying to really just focus on, the next day, you're going to have another game, or you're going to have another practice, just trying to focus on the positives rather than the negatives.
Is there anything, if you are feeling like overwhelmed or anything about like any regrets or anything like that, is there anything that you do to kind of help yourself kind of like de-stress, unwind outside of just picking up a stick and playing lacrosse?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always important to not just have one hobby, like especially as an athlete. If lacrosse is going to be your entire life, there's a very strong possibility that it's going to end sometime. So you got to make sure that it's like you want to have fun and enjoy it while it lasts, but also know that there's so much more to life than just lacrosse. So you want to find those other things that you enjoy, being with your friends, other activities. Like for me, it's I love fishing. I love being on my boat. I love being with my friends and stuff like that. So, I mean, yes, I will take my boat to the beach and probably bring a fiddlestick with me. But again, it's a different environment when you're just playing for fun rather than when you're playing with refs and a crowd and pressure. You're on the beach with a fiddlestick. There's no pressure there. So I think although it is still playing lacrosse to kind of relieve that stress, it's a different form of lacrosse in a different environment where that pressure is just kind of lifted and you can just have as much fun as you did when you were a kid and when you started playing.
Yeah, I don't know. We haven't asked anyone this question before, but you obviously have talked a lot about just like kind of taking a different perspective to the game and just like being more creative and stuff like that. Do you have any like absurd habits or any like habits that are like kind of seen as like crazy from anyone else that you are like a passionate believer in?
I mean, I don't know if it's okay, yeah. I don't know if it's maybe everybody who thinks this, but I've definitely come across people who think that I gotta rephrase this. I gotta be smart about this. Sorry, guys. All right, so I believe face guards are a very controversy aspect to our game, and I think the more involved you can be, the better. I think the reason a team is going to face guard you is because they don't want you to touch the ball. So why would you not want to then, like kind of you want to get the ball? Not for me. If I'm getting face guard, it's not for me to get the goal. It's not for me to run through three people to score. It's for me to get the ball. So now their defense has to be like, oh crap, everyone turns their heads, and now I can find that backside or draw a quick slide. So I think being face guarded in, against any team, it's super important to stay involved and set picks for your teammates and just be annoying, right? You just want to be annoying and be a nuisance and just kind of like, mess with the defenders on the other team. If they're going to face guard you, why can't I get open? Why can't I get the ball? Why can't I get my teammates open? That sort of thing. And I think that can be a little bit of a controversy topic, but that's my belief. And I think if any of my players are ever face guarded, I'm going to make sure that they are staying involved and setting picks for their teammates and not just standing at the 30.
I completely agree. You got to be involved.
Mm-hmm.
Got to be involved.
Just to kind of close up here a little bit, if you could kind of just leave some words of wisdom. We've been asking everyone if you could put a quote or put something on a billboard for billions of people to see everywhere, would you put on the billboard?
Be comfortable being uncomfortable. Try to get out of that comfort zone.
I like it. I like you mentioned that a couple times. Definitely helps, and not just lacrosse, but just life in general.
Right.
Anything you think we should ask you, or anything you wish that we should ask you that you kind of think you'd like to talk about?
I don't know. I think that was pretty much it.
Pretty much it.
Yeah.
Connor, anything else? Anything else from you?
No, I think this was great. I thought this was awesome, Nicole. I think you dropped a lot of knowledge on all of us, and excited to post this. But this was great. So thank you.
Awesome. Anytime. I really appreciate you guys having me on and a part of this. I'm excited for you guys and to see how it, grows through the island, especially being from here and like having a dad who's still so involved with everything that's going on.
Yeah, definitely exciting to see. We'll see what happens, but we're doing our best. We're gonna give it all we got, and definitely looking forward to seeing what happens with you out in Colorado. Wish you the best, and grow the team.
Yep, and we'll support you in any way possible. So we really appreciate your support as well. So thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
Awesome. Thank you.